The GOP is on the warpath against Biden, even as he takes a pretty hardline approach on immigrants at the border. Now, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas defended the Biden administration by touting his unwillingness to allow asylum seekers into the country during the coronavirus. Let's take a look at what he had to say over the weekend.
We heard the sheriff say it, the governor say it, and the migrants I spoke to say it. They are coming across because they believe they will be welcomed under the Biden administration. You said yourself 3 weeks ago, we're not saying don't come, we're saying don't come now. President Biden had a stronger message later, but the messages are mixed at best, Mr. Secretary.
The message is quite clear, do not come. The border is closed, the border is secure. We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults. We are encouraging children not to come. Now is not the time to come. Do not come. The journey is dangerous. We are building safe, orderly, and humane ways to address the needs of vulnerable children. Do not come.
So what he's referring to there is, families coming to the border, adult migrants coming to the border. However, in regard to unaccompanied minors, while he's clearly discouraging them from coming to the border, the Biden administration has been clear in stating that they will not immediately deport them or send them back. And that's because they want to take a more compassionate approach. And the problem is that in doing these half measures, right? In trying to appeal to the scaremongering that's being put out there by the right wing, what the Biden administration is doing is losing on both sides. You have the left that's furious with the fact that there are 15,000 migrant children in US custody right now. They're being placed in many of the facilities that obviously we had problems with under the Trump administration, and for me personally, I have a problem with under the Biden administration as well. At the same time, the argument that Biden has opened the borders and has allowed migrants to flow into the country, unmitigated, that is a lie coming from the Republican Party. And just to summarize this, and I'll give you more details to kind of prove what I'm trying to say here. Let's be clear, both sides are not being completely honest with what's really going on at the border right now. Before I give you more details, Cenk, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so I'll jump in with a detail. So there was something called Title 42. That was an emergency declaration that was done around March of last year by Trump administration saying because of the COVID virus, we're going to expel everyone that comes to the border. Normally they would be brought in, detained, and they would go through a certain process, right? And here he ended the process altogether. Now, before he left office, a judge ruled that you can't do that for kids, unaccompanied kids that are at the border. And so he stopped doing it, and so Biden took over, and basically on that note has followed Trump completely. So he didn't want to expel unaccompanied minors in the first place. Biden didn't, but still nothing actually changed as he took over. So we do have the kids brought in now. They're just unaccompanied. If they're with a family, everybody gets expelled. So if you're on the left and you want the immigrants to go through a certain process and not just be automatically expelled, well, right now Biden has the same exact policy as Trump. So I guess you should be furious about that. And if you're on the right, other than trying to make giant political hay out of this, which you've succeeded at, on this note, I don't know what you're complaining about. It is identical to Trump's policy when Trump left office.
Right, exactly. And I'm happy that you mentioned what the federal courts had indicated regarding unaccompanied minors, because whether Trump wanted to immediately deport them or not, that was struck down. And again, that happened prior to Biden taking office. So it's not Biden's policy to keep the unaccompanied minors in these facilities rather than immediately deport them. That was the policy that was obviously the result of the federal courts chiming in on it. The other thing to kind of bear in mind is that Biden did, in fact, campaign on a more compassionate strategy, right, when it comes to immigration. And one of the things that he wanted to implement but wasn't able to do was a 100-day ban on all deportations. But a Trump-appointed judge struck that down. They appealed and it was struck down again. So he wasn't actually able to implement the 100-day ban on deportations. But there are other issues with how the Biden administration is tackling this as well, including not being completely honest with the American people. The video that you're about to watch, again featuring Mayorkas, gives you yet another example of that. Let's take a look.
Did you change the policy too quickly without having the infrastructure in place to take care of these children?
We are executing on our plan. It does take time. It is difficult, but it is taking time and it is difficult because the entire system was dismantled by the prior administration. There was a system in place in both Republican and Democratic administrations that was torn down during the Trump administration, and that is why the challenge is more acute than it ever has been before. We are rebuilding the orderly systems that the Trump administration tore down to avoid the need for these children to actually take the perilous journey.
But the truth is that the Trump administration didn't dismantle the immigration system. What they did do was make it incredibly difficult for asylum seekers to actually get asylum. In fact, they effectively banned asylum seeking. So if anyone tried to go through the legal means in order to get into the country through a port of entry, for instance, Border Patrol severely limited the migrants' ability to do that, right? So if you wanna consider that dismantling it, well, just reverse that. That's not a difficult thing to undo, right? But the problem is, on one hand, you have Mayorkas saying, no, we're turning everyone back unless they're unaccompanied minors. Okay, well, that's the decision that the Biden administration is making. On the other hand, they're blaming Trump for dismantling a well-oiled machine that dealt with asylum seekers, and that's just not true. Don't get me wrong, Trump was awful when it came to asylum seekers. In fact, the US Border Patrol apprehended nearly 100,000 migrants at the US border in February, the 10th consecutive month of increased apprehensions and a turn to levels last seen in mid 2019. There is an increase in the flow of migrants coming to the border. There's no question about that. But the Biden administration, the problem is they haven't really reversed the Trump administration's policies. The only thing that it might seem like they reversed is the issue with the unaccompanied minors. But again, that was something that was already implemented based on a court ruling, on a federal judge's ruling before Biden was elected. It's just, this is a difficult, complicated situation. And I think the Biden administration is having a difficult time really committing to one strategy. Either they're gonna be compassionate and deal with this completely differently than Trump, or they're gonna do these half measures where they're trying to pander to voters in this country who have been terrified by migrants thanks to the rhetoric coming from conservatives in the country, or they're not gonna win with Republicans. There's no way. They're gonna try to pander just like Obama did, and it's not gonna work. And I know I just mentioned Obama, but one more thing, Cenk. Biden made it clear that he wanted his immigration strategy to be much more compassionate than Obama's. He felt that the Obama administration made many mistakes in taking a hardline approach against migrants, right? But at the same time, when you look at what's being done in practice, it actually is very similar to how the Obama administration handled it. In fact, they've opened some of the facilities that the Obama administration was using to detain these minors. The problem is you do have a flow of unaccompanied minors coming into the country looking for safety. The Biden administration wants to be compassionate and not turn them away. And at the same time, they are deporting everyone else, including families who come to the border.
So in terms of the structural and legal system, I'm sure that Trump did some damage. You remember the quotes he used to have about judges. So why do we need judges? I don't even want judges, right? And so when you have a moron like that in charge, obviously he's gonna corrode the system we have in place. On the other hand, I agree with Anna because of facts. So most of that is still in place, and they're going to need some time to ramp up. But Biden's chief of staff also said, "Oh my God, they handed us a record low number of beds for unaccompanied minor children. Well, that's not true either. Under Obama, at one point, there was only 2,000 beds. When Trump left, there was 13,000 beds. So yes, it was dipping from the height of a year before that under Trump, which was at 16,000, but that's not a record low number of beds. So that's basically making excuses. And I get it, you got to ramp up real quick and change these policies and then move them to detention centers that are not cruel. And these are hard logistical challenges. So let's be fair about that. At the same time, we've got to hold them accountable for reality. And I actually think, now going to political analysis, I'll back this up with numbers in a sec, but the Biden administration might actually be annoyed at the left for not attacking them enough on this issue. Because my guess is that they did a classic Biden strategy of trying to appear reasonable by straddling the middle. We'll mainly follow Trump's policies, but we'll talk about kids in cages, but we won't let the media see that we're housing the kids in similar places. And then so we'll have the right wing attack us just because they hate immigrants and they were gonna attack us no matter what, even if we did everything that Trump did. And we'll have the left attack us for really not changing much. And then we'll seem so reasonable. And in the entirety of the press will back us on that. Oh, poor Joe Biden, he's the reasonable center. But in this case, the left hasn't spoken out much. So it's just right-wing attacks. So that's the whole conversation now nationally. There's almost no progressive critique that I'm seeing. It's all, has Biden been brutal enough to the immigrants? And plus, we're really mad that he's not letting us take pictures and video. So just a couple of quick facts about that. Look, when you say, well, Biden's letting unaccompanied children in. Yeah, for a long time, Trump was trying to stop that. That's definitely true. And he had expelled 3,200 kids in October alone that had come unaccompanied. And he said, just go back. We're not allowing you in. But because of court orders, by December, that had fallen to just 3. And in January, it was just 18 kids who were expelled by Trump. So there's not that much of a difference between 3, 18, and 0, which is what Biden's at, and they're following court orders. So it's not like Biden's doing something heroic by following what the judge's orders that Trump followed, right? And then finally, on the expulsions, remember, everyone but the unaccompanied kids gets expelled under the Title 42 that Biden's doing. So in February, when Biden was in charge, of the 100,000, more than 100,000 encounters at the border, 72,000 of those, in other words, the overwhelming majority, were immediately expelled with no hearings, no process, or anything. So let's keep it real. The Republicans are obviously exaggerating at a minimum about the height of the problem, and it was all Biden's fault, etc. No, he's following largely Trump's policies. On the other hand, Biden doesn't get to brag about how great he's been to immigrants when you've barely changed anything.
And Cenk, let me be clear about one other thing. I don't know if you're referring to progressives in Congress not holding Biden's feet to the fire. If you are talking about that, then you're right. I haven't particularly seen any progressive lawmakers go after Biden on his immigration policies, at least aggressively. But in terms of progressive media, I have seen quite a bit of critique. I have seen a lot of criticism. I mean, Jordan Ewell's a great example. Jordan Ewell, I go to his Twitter account when I want to stay up to date on what the latest is regarding Biden's latest foibles in dealing with the immigration issue at the border. However, the media, I feel, has chosen to really amplify the criticisms coming from disingenuous right-wing actors, and that's an issue. Because what it does is really pressure the Biden administration to continue pandering to people who have no interest in giving Biden credit for anything. If Biden decided to take unaccompanied minors and tell them to turn around, right? In fact, started shooting at them as they're turning around and going back, it still wouldn't make the right wing happy in this country. My point is, Biden, you're not supposed to be pandering to the right wing. You campaigned on a compassionate approach on migration, then deal with it in a compassionate way. Stop with the half measures. It's not helping the situation.
Yeah, look, I love what you said, but I actually think the main culprit there is not at all Biden. It's the mainstream media. And so why? Biden's a bellwether. You're not gonna change Biden. Biden floats with the wind. That's what he's done his entire career. So, but the mainstream media thinks a right-wing line of attack on Biden on immigration is perfectly credible and reasonable, and they will talk about it non-stop. They think a progressive critique of Biden on almost anything is illegitimate and not credible. So it sends an uneven playing field. So Washington Post, New York Times, etc., all they'll talk about is right-wing critique on most issues, and definitely this one. So then Biden thinks, I guess there's no pressure from the left. I read the Washington Post and the New York Times this morning, and I listened to NPR on the way in. If he's still, I think he lives there, but at the White House. And I didn't hear a peep out of the left. Well, yeah, because they filtered our voice out. And Jordan, look, we think Jordan Yule's so great. We gave him a show on Twitch, Deep Dive. You should check it out. But the rest of the media, honestly, just thinks we're all invisible. And without their coverage, we cannot be a balancing act in Joe Biden's bellwether, and that makes him lean right wing almost every time.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say one final thing, and this will be the final thing in the video, Cenk. Media, instead of just regurgitating what both sides are saying, can you do a little bit of fact checking? Like, this story was a disaster to research because no one actually does the fact checking, right? You might find some standalone pieces that are like buried in, the 28th page of whichever paper you're reading, but it's so impossible to try to decipher which side is lying and which side is telling the truth. And I want to be clear, both sides in this particular story right now are not being honest.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.